So I wanted to do this video a little bit sooner, but it's been a hectic week. But this is a video from Jimmy Dore's channel. Jimmy Dore is not in the video. I think he might be on comedy tour right now. I'm not 100% sure, but he's got the guys from Do Dissidents here. They're sitting down with Whitney Webb. Whitney Webb is an author and researcher. I advise everybody to get her most recent book. It is called One Nation. Let me double check. One Nation Under Blackmail. Um, and it's a two-part volume series, but it is One Nation Under Blackmail: The Sword Union Between Intelligence and Crime that gave rise to Jeffrey Epstein. Um, with me being so busy, I normally just do Audible now, but it's definitely on Audible. You obviously can get the hardcover and the paperback. But Whitney Webb is um, I want to make sure. I believe she is the daughter of Gary Webb. I have yet to 100% confirm that, but I think she's the daughter of Gary Webb. And if anybody knows anything about the Iran Contra scandal with Freeway Ricky and Oliver Oliver North, Oscar Blandon, um, and the whole thing with the Iran Contra scandal, wanting to go after Manuel and everything. But her dad was the one who cracked that cocaine was being pumped into South Central LA in order to fund the Black Wars or the Dark Wars for the Deep State. Um, he wrote a book called The Dark Alliance, um, and mysteriously ended up suicided with two gunshot wounds to the back of the head. But she kind of picks off of the foundation that he laid, kind of gives a backstory on how the mob got involved with intelligence, how they pretty much created, with the Italian mob and the Jewish mob, pretty much created the nation of Israel, empowered their intelligence, our intelligence, apparatus, and how the blackmail program started. She gives into a lot of detail on what they're doing now. Of course, the Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, Robert Maxwell ring that kind of transpired out of that. So it's a very, very detailed book. It definitely gives direct evidence to where the bodies are buried, figuratively speaking. So I highly recommend everybody read that if you get a chance, or at least listen to it. But Whitney has been on several podcasts over the past couple of years. Patrick Bet-David podcast. I think she's been on Kim Iverson. Um, she has also been on Tim Dillon, um, and Sabby Sabs. So it is very imperative if you really want to know what true wokeness is, not the blue hair cat lady shit. Fucking fuck all that. Real woke, real is being, really hip to what's going on in behind the scenes with our government. So I wanted to review this. She kind of gives the details about Trump. If anybody knows me, I'm not a Trump hater. I'm not a Trump stan either. I think that all the presidents, they're in a club that we're not in. Um, the last president that truly worked for the establishment was John F. Kennedy. Um, and they popped his brother too. So another side note, they've also popped Malcolm, they popped Martin, Fred Hampton, um, as well. But I think that as long as Donald Trump talks about this guy right here and kind of stands on those policies of Steve Bannon, this economic populism that I personally agree with, more of the Steve Bannon front. But when he's not, and he's kind of concerned about his buddies and stuff in the establishment. then of course, I usually come to some kind of disagreement with Trump. But I'm not a Trump hater. I just think that all presidents since Kennedy, they somehow subdue themselves to the deep state.
Um, Donald Trump recently called on the CIA to act to sort of stabilize the country in the wake of these New Year's Eve, New Year's
What do you
Day
know?
terror attacks. Yes. So, I mean, this is kind of a broad question, but was Trump ever a target of the deep state? And do you believe that the intelligence services were behind the attempts on his life over the summer?
So I didn't pay very close attention to the exact narratives and anomalies with the Trump assassination attempts, but I did notice that before they started that there was a lack of enthusiasm among Trump's base because people still sort of remembered what had happened the first time around and
Mhm.
weren't necessarily as enthusiastic because he proved himself the first time around. He wasn't really the anti-establishment maverick he had sold himself as being. But of course, the assassination attempts, whether you believe that they were authentic or not, ultimately had the end result of convincing people that Trump is indeed anti-establishment. But then you have people, the ultimate deep state people, supposedly after Trump, like former CIA director under Obama John Brennan, being like, actually, Trump is actually doing some cool stuff. I don't know, and all these, I mean, if it was really the deep state after him, subsequent those things, and after the election victory, I just find it hard to believe that you would believe in the omni power of the quote unquote deep state, and then he gets elected and really nothing happens. And people are speculating that the Al Qaeda thing and all of that, is something to uh, complicate Trump before he gets into office. But I mean, if you have any experience with this stuff, as particularly the use of Al Qaeda as a CIA boogeyman, the goal of it is to equate U.S. foreign policy interests with Israeli foreign policy or regional, in Israel's case, interests, and really the idea that it's October 7th style attacks for
Um, it is starting to seem that Bibi Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, had already been forewarned by Egypt of this attack on this day. And so it's starting to kind of give like this Pearl Harbor, September 2001 kind of vibe, um, where they knew it was going to happen, they let it and allowed it to happen, or they had pretty much pure involvement with it happening. So, and of course, it was always to drag us into war. So you look at what has kind of happened, with Bibi. He was obviously warned. He definitely backed and supported Hamas over the past few decades. So it's not like that this group just kind of miraculously appeared. They have been supported and backed by Bibi, and the conditions were set over, almost a century. I wouldn't probably say a century, but 70-ish years, 60, 70 years that this was kind of being pushed to happen, um, just because of the conditions that Israel brought upon the Palestinians. So that's a different discussion for now, but I did want to kind of give that um, information.
example, and then the idea that all of a sudden conflating ISIS with Palestine, and a lot of the other stuff that's happened sort of has the markings of sort of, instead of a plan to stop Trump's foreign policy plan, a way to sort of tee him up for
Right.
some sort of, extended military presence or new war in the Middle East. And if he does that, I anticipate they will wind Ukraine down, just as they wound Afghanistan down before they started
Right.
Ukraine. They will do the same to divert resources to that particular area. But you have to get Trump's base that is tired of foreign wars and elected him allegedly to stop foreign wars excited about a foreign war. So you have to manufacture that. It seems more like a tee up than an attempt to derail an agenda, especially when his Secretary of Defense nominee is an enthusiastic a promoter of the idea of blowing up the Al-Aqsa Mosque and replacing it with a third temple, which a lot of the extremists in Netanyahu's cabinet have been very vocal about doing. And that's also in and of itself a very complex topic. But
So she's referring to Marco Rubio, which is the Adelson pick. She's also referring to Mike Huckabee, who is a Zionist Christian. The Zionist Christians, when you read the book called The Israel Lobby, let me get you the name um, of the author. Um, yeah. Um, ooh. It is written by John J. Mersheimer. Um, he wrote this book back in the August of 2007. He wrote this after America's invasion into Afghanistan and Iraq, how we were kind of pimped out. He definitely gives a very, very detailed um, explanation of how both the Republican and Democratic Party has been bought out by organizations like AIPAC and Israel, and how we have become beholden to Israel. And but to kind of go back to the Mike Huckabee kind of thing, he also gives a talk of detail about how Zionist Christians um, have been pimped out by their universities. So obviously, the Israel lobby has sponsored professors at these colleges and universities, therefore who train up pastors, and then these pastors go over here and train up their their congregation. So obviously, all of this is to usher in the second coming of Christ. Um, on a personal level, I think that God's word doesn't go void. So we're irregardless, it's going things are going to happen. But I don't think that we should be supporting um, a temple that's dedicated to, when you read the Book of Revelation, dedicated to the Antichrist. That's kind of like supporting Satan, and of course, the whole New Jerusalem and all this other stuff. I understand that, but the intention is to support um, the Jewish Messiah, who is not Jesus Christ. So that's a whole other topic. We're not going to go there today. But yeah. So these are the kind of things that we have to be concerned about. Obviously, when you have an America first, making America a great again mentality, spending $24 trillion just in Afghanistan and Iraq alone is not for the betterment of America. It's not like we went over there, got all this cheap oil, and we're only paying like 25 cents a gallon. We are literally getting companies like Raytheon, Halliburton, Boeing, and all these other countries. I mean, companies that are getting these um, contracts from the United States government, um, and then we're going to go blow up these countries. We will be reviewing part of the original agenda that Bibi Netanyahu wanted us to do was to go after 7 countries. We are the only one we haven't gone to into 100% right now is Iran, so we're kind of teeing that up. But it's not for the betterment of America. It's not good for our national security. It's not good for our military. It's not good for our servicemen and women that are serving to, you know, somewhat try under this disguise of protecting us, but ultimately they're fighting a politicians, um, oligarchs war. So
I'll leave it
Miriam
there for
Adelson. I
now.
mean, to me, I
Yeah.
mean, you could tell the whole story right there.
She's his Citibank.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, Sheldon Adelson essentially, had a lot of control, almost complete control, arguably, over foreign policy under Trump the first time. He's the person that had H.R. McMaster switched out for John Bolton when Trump was in. last time, for example. So I'm sure Miriam Adelson helped pick the national security advisor this time around, who is a shameless neocon, basically Lindsey Graham, but just not named Lindsey Graham, you know? And so I don't really think Trump was planning, if you look at his appointees, to have a not neocon foreign policy agenda. But a lot of this rhetoric circulating right now seems to benefit what his intended policies were going to be going into it, not necessarily a way to stop him. But to go back to the question of, was he, the deep state, ever after him? I've never really done this on an interview before, but I'll give you my whole spiel about how I view Donald Trump. So, you know, I mentioned Trump a bit in my Epstein book, but not extensively. And I probably should have mentioned a bit more. And I also didn't have all the information at the time when I published it. But essentially, you know, Trump was bailed out by this particular bank, Rothschild Inc., which was basically the Wall Street branch of the Rothschild banking dynasty in Europe that was set up, I believe, in the late 70s, early 1980s, basically run by this guy named Robert Peary. And they basically became a big mergers and acquisitions firm on Wall Street. And they picked a handful of people to sort of be their emissaries into the world of M&As. In the United States. And the two people, well, they picked three people. One of them was James Goldsmith, who's I guess a distant cousin of the Rothschilds. He's a currency trader. He was actually one of the earliest ties of Epstein to sort of the world of elite society back in the early 70s. And a good friend of Robert Maxwell, who was the second figure picked for this, that would be Ghislaine Maxwell's father. And then the third one, I forget his name, but he was a business associate of Robert Maxwell in that time. Robert Maxwell sort of enters the U.S. in 1990 and sort of tries to establish a foothold in New York City. He's courted by these figures that later form, a year later after Maxwell dies, the Mega Group, as it's called, which was founded by Leslie Wexner and Charles Bronfman. It includes a lot of these other figures that in media in 1990 were openly courting Robert Maxwell. And Robert Maxwell, with the help of Rothschild Inc., sort of acquires Macmillan and makes a big foothold into New York and brings Ghislaine with him. And so he dies in 1991, and Ghislaine and Epstein team up, right? But then also around the same time, you know, Trump falls into bankruptcy, and Trump had a lot of associations with the same New York world, sort of that combines the remnants, I guess you could say, of the Jewish mob via Roy Cohn. And sort of in that organized crime milieu that was also connected to political power. Roy Cohn was Trump's mentor, for example. So Trump is in this major bankruptcy situation, and he's bailed out by Rothschild Inc. The main banker to do that is Wilbur Ross, who Trump later rewards with a post as Commerce Secretary in his first term, even though he was extremely geriatric and fell asleep at a bunch of meetings. It was obviously a favor repay, if you ask me. But anyway, when the bankers were interviewed about why they bailed out Trump, because it didn't make any economic sense for them, and they weren't really a bankruptcy firm, or distressed asset firm. They were like, well, we did it because the Trump name is an asset. The name Trump, him as a person, is an asset to us. And if you look at how Trump governed the first time, very adjacent and arguably beholden, to Israel, which has a lot of connections to the same organized crime milieu who helped, arm it, during the Haganah and Irgun phases before the founding of the state of Israel. And so, I would argue that Trump is very, very much beholden to that particular interest group, because he wouldn't really exist as he exists today without them. And it's also worth pointing out, I have an article coming out about this later. So the actual person who is responsible for the Black Book being made public, well, it was published by Nick Bryant and Gawker. And I think I actually had to do something with Peter Thiel taking down Gawker, because Thiel and Epstein were meeting in that same period of time that the Black Book was published. But it was Epstein's butler that acquired that book and tried to shop it around. And then one of the the Epstein victim lawyers, Brad Edwards, reported him to the FBI. And then this guy gets sent to prison. He dies in prison in 2015, the same year that, Trump is becoming a political candidate, and Gawker gets shut down and all of this. Sorry, my spiel is long. And I
Got
must
that.
pause for water.
I'm getting thirsty just listening.
Yeah,
I'm
but
out of water myself.
but if you go and
Go
you
ahead.
actually read the Black Book,
So you mentioned Jewish mobsters. There's still a synagogue on the Lower East Side that lights a candle to Bugsy Siegel, and that's part of the reason because he gave so much money to Israel.
well, he
And Mayor Lansky and Lucky Luciano. Of course, Lucky was part of the Italian mob, Mayor and Bugsy were part of the Jewish mob, but you should do some very detailed research into Roy Cohn, the lawyer for Trump. Was definitely part of the whole McCarthyism um, kind of thing kind of going on back in the day. He also had large ties with the mob, um, was definitely embedded deep with two of the mob bosses from two of the families. Um, I just watched a video today, so I may do a reaction to that video. But Roy Cohn was not a great guy. Um, he was one of the first ones to be able to get the blackmail needed on J. Edgar Hoover for being homosexual because Roy Cohn was also a homosexual. Um, Looking back at it, nobody really cares. It's 2024, but back then it was literally equivalent to what Jeffrey Epstein was doing. So, um, of course, now that we look at it with a 2024 lens, Jeffrey is way more deplorable, but in the sense of, back then, it was almost a death sentence to be, exposed as gay. So
also gave a lot of weapons to Israel. And so did the Bronfman family. They finance a lot of the weapon shipments and have a long-standing tie to organized crime. Yeah, it's controversial to talk about, but it is history. And if the U.S. has a deep state, Israel most certainly has one as well. So just leave it there. But anyway, I forgot exactly where I was in my Trump spiel here.
Trump
Oh
got.
yeah, okay. So the butler, in Epstein's
It's
Black
always the
Book.
butler. The butler did it.
Yeah,
That's
well,
right,
he
yeah.
annotated the book and he circled a bunch of names that he said were involved in the case. And this is, of course, years before Trump was a political candidate. And actually, Trump is one of the circled names, and no one's ever really been interested in talking about that, which I think is interesting. We don't really know, but there are some interesting ties there. Is it possible? It is. I think it is clear that the two of them broke ties in the mid 2000s. I think it was like 2005 or 2006, somewhere in that ballpark. But it was over a real estate. They wanted the same piece of real estate in Palm Beach, and that sort of ruined their friendship. It doesn't mean they didn't do terrible things together before, potentially, right?
and there's also another kind of rumor was that Jeffrey had went to Mar-a-Lago and was hollering at a lot of the other establishment guys' daughters, which had upset Trump. Of course, that's just speculation, but I do want to be honest. That's another rumor. So maybe Trump is a stand-up guy when it when it comes to underage girls. Like I said, you know, I wasn't there. I wouldn't want to be there. I wouldn't even want to be in the same room as guys. I wouldn't even want to be on the same. I don't even want to be on the same planet as guys touching little kids. But hey, this is America, and niggas is weird.
And there's a lot of evidence that they were very, very close in the 1980s and throughout most of the 1990s. Maxwell and Epstein claim that they were set up, that they set him up with Melania, his current wife. And also, Epstein had ties to his girlfriend before Melania, Selena Middelfart, who's a Norwegian heiress with an unfortunate last name.
Yeah, well,
Yeah, that's a tough one.
Yeah, but I mean, essentially, what people overlook with Epstein is that he wasn't just, abusing these girls with very few resources and promising them a lot of stuff, and then exploiting them sexually and pimping them out to powerful people. He was also basically pimping out women that he did fund their education and did
Mhm.
help make them refined women or whatever, and then basically marketed them off to powerful people as wives.
Also, he was kind of like in the currency and stock game. Definitely more of his bigger crimes outside of, the the little girls and all that. Um, he was kind of more of an economic hitman, or a get rich quick scheme. Um, Definitely had ties to, um, the Nobel Peace Prize and the science community, um, Palantir, um, the PayPal, some of the guys from the PayPal mafia. Go deeper into that. Um, but yeah, um, yeah, a lot of his crimes, that's just the headline, and it should be. But a lot of the backdoor dealings that he had was in economics and in the science world and tech world, spyware and stuff, and spying and all that kind of stuff.
Um,
So Trump is potentially very controlled by Israel, or at least this particular organized crime faction entity that has a lot of influence in both countries. And really, there hasn't been a lot of interest in looking at it very closely from really, I don't know. Anyone. And it's I take the L here because I should have looked more closely at the annotations of the Black Book before my book came out, and I did not really do that.
Well, those books of
um
yours were too short. I mean, that's what people say about them.
Well, I had a very
it's like-
short
I have
deadline.
it sitting on my
Short.
nightstand right now.
Yeah.
your
Yeah,
book.
well, I mean, honestly, I wrote that book. Well, volume one, I basically co-wrote with Ed Berger, who's an amazing researcher, because it was just the scope I wanted to do and the time I wanted to do it. It wasn't feasible. But yeah, I had basically like a year to write that book. And it
Wow.
was very crazy. And I
Wow.
just had a baby.
Wow.
Oh,
You know,
congratulations.
yeah, well,
Wow,
it
so
was a
you
while
had a
ago, but thanks.
baby. What's that?
Well, it was a while ago, but it was when I was writing the book. So the book came out in September
Oh, okay. So,
2021,
while you
and I
were
had
writing,
a
okay. I thought you were
yeah,
talking
and
Yeah,
about
no,
my
while
son
she
was
was
born
writing
at
it.
the
No,
end
no.
of 2021, so it was a lot to juggle. It was pretty
It's
insane.
impressive
So
that you can do
I
all
did
this.
leave.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, but I
After
did leave
having
stuff
had a
out.
baby. Yeah.
So I'm looking at the possibility of doing a hardcover edition where I fill in a lot of the gaps that I wasn't able to get to when I actually wrote the book, because I basically had to stop my whole Epstein timeline at 2006, 2007 at his first arrest. I didn't have time to go into everything that happened after that.
Right.
I have lots of articles on Unlimited Hangout and elsewhere that go into some of the stuff that happened after, but unfortunately, an exhaustive um, piece of work I unfortunately don't have in that direction yet. Um,
Volume
yeah, but
three.
anyway,
Volume
mhm.
3.
Fortunately, we have an incoming FBI director who is going to reveal all of this. He's gonna blow the lid off the whole thing, the whole Epstein thing. He's gonna
Yeah,
follow
mhm.
the paper trail. So a lot of
and
people
and he's going to
believe he's
tell
gonna
Americans to wake up
dismantle.
and support Israel also.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
I'm
he's
sure
going
he'll
to
really get to
dismantle
the
the deep
bottom of it.
state. So
Hmm.
here's a clip of him talking about how he's going to break the FBI.
FBI's footprint has gotten so freaking big, and the biggest problem the FBI has come out of its intel shops. I'd break that component out of it. I'd shut down the FBI Hoover building on day one and reopening the next day as a museum of the deep state. And I'd take the 7,000 employees that work in that building and send them across America to chase down criminals. Go be cops. You're cops. Go be cops. Go chase down murderers and drug dealers and violent offenders. What do you need 7,000 people there for? Same thing with DOJ. What are all these people doing here? Looking for their next government promotion, looking for their next fancy government title, looking for their parachute out of government. So while you're bringing in the right people, you also have to shrink government.
All right, so hey, why are you such a negative Nancy there? Cash is on the case.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I'm inherently skeptical of these people, and I remember what happened at the DOJ last time Trump was in office. I mean, supposedly he's learned his lesson and didn't actually pick those people or whatever. But if it comes to hunting down any sort of crime that involves, the intelligence services of a particular country, the size of New Jersey in the Middle East, I don't think Kash Patel or Tulsi Gabbard has any interest in doing that based on their statements in the past year and a half. And certainly a lot of the other rhetoric vocalized by essentially every other nominee, in the Trump administration leads me to that conclusion as well. And that's something that wouldn't be exclusive to a Trump administration either. Essentially, Democrat administrations also turn a blind eye to that type of stuff as well. So as far as any truth, coming about the Epstein case, if there are releases, I think they will be politically useful to the people that are releasing them. I don't necessarily expect blanket uh, releases. Why? Because I don't think Epstein was exclusively working for Israel. I think he definitely did. But I think, just like Robert Maxwell, he had ties to multiple intelligence services, and it includes American intelligence, and also a lot of very powerful people on Wall Street heavily relied on Epstein for a lot of stuff. I mean, a lot of my work really points to him having been really a financial terrorist more than he even was a sex blackmailer. That sex blackmailing was secondary to the financial crimes that he committed on behalf of very powerful billionaires linked to organized crime, like Leslie Wexner. And there's evidence that he did that for the Bronfmans as well, and that led to him being ousted from Bear Stearns in the early 1980s. But there's also a lot of evidence that he was personally involved with the collapse of Bear Stearns in 2008, that led to this big wealth transfer that benefited a lot of people in this particular network. What do you know?
Come see us on tour in Los Angeles,
But
Honolulu,
that's it
Dallas,
for now,
Texas,
ladies and
Baltimore, Atlantic
gents.
City.
And any furries watching, always welcome the furries. Maybe you can talk to my dog Mac as to why he's been misbehaving. But neither here or there. We're gonna try to get some more videos done tonight. But I just wanted to release this that way. At least there's something interesting for y'all to review. Make sure y'all read those books. Make sure you follow Whitney Webb. Make sure you follow Due Dissidents, and especially Jimmy Dore. But that's all I got for tonight. Peace.